Hey guys, it's Doa. You may think to yourself, hey, Doa's too nice to be on Thorin's channel. Why is he there? And you're right. He's locked me in his closet, and I'm being forced to record this. Help?
Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Rotations. My co-host is going to be Crumbz again for this one. Apparently the least popular co-host, Crumbz. I don't know where this happened, mate. I always thought you're like a pretty amiable guy, a very charismatic guy from what I've known in person. Why does everyone on Reddit hate you now? Have you noticed that? Where's this come from?
Okay, it comes from multiple places, Thorin, because I've noticed it as well. The first one is, I'm a traitor now. You know, when I went to Overwatch and came back, I cannot be forgiven for that sin. There's just no way I'm allowed to enter back into the realm of League of Legends without first kissing somebody's hand or somebody's feet.
You got the mark of Cain on you from going over. You'd think they'd be celebrating the fact he came back. Doesn't that mean that League won in that regard, you know?
You know, the crazy thing about it, too, is that I've noticed a lot of people, too, have actually never seen or anything that I've done before. So they just show up and like, oh, who is this guy? Right. Oh, fuck it. Like, we hate him. We hate him. All right, that's fine. But that's good for me because that's partially what I'm based on. Half hatred from people and half praise. So we're good to go.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I mean, Licorice is universally loved, mate. And to be fair, he nowadays, he's such a nice guy. He even just starts the game, like gives the enemy top laner 2 kills and goes, this will even it up a bit. You guys aren't that good in this role at the moment, so let's give you a chance at least. This be sporting, you know, still usually win the game anyway, but I appreciate that, you know, for English culture, that's how we had it in hunting culture there. You know, you give the guy a warning shot, then he starts running into the forest. You don't just come after him immediately, Licorice. That'd be unsporting. He's never going to get away. So you've got to give him a chance, a little bit of sweat. Can we talk about that, by the way? Because you know that you know the weird thing about like memes and narratives is usually the first time you bring them up, they're just like a funny observance or like pattern you've seen, but usually they're not like set in stone. But it does feel like memes become more real over time. Like that whole meme that you always died first in top lane, that used to be a meme, mate. Like it used to happen occasionally. It feels like it's happened so many times this year. How has that become like more real than the meme now?
Yeah, I mean, it happened a couple times in a row, and I think recently it actually like hasn't happened too much, unless I'm wrong. I don't know. It's not something I focus on too much.
No, now people just blur. Here's the thing. Now people blur you just dying with dying first. Yeah, the pattern before was you always died first in the lane, right?
Yeah. Now it's just every time I have a death. Like I had the Kale game. I died at like once at 30 minutes where they like used 4 ults, like Pantheon ulted behind or an ult in front, and they just like wombo comboed me.
Right.
And then everyone's like, there goes Licorice dying first again, you know, the usual.
I've got a question for you, which goes like this, right? When you have losses for Cloud9, because they happen so rarely, we have to talk about the context of them, right? The problem I have is this. Of the 2 losses, the second one's an interesting one. We can get into that. But I want to know about this first one, right, where you just basically played that Wukong bot lane again. Like, this is the question, Licorice, is like, was that purposely supposed to be an experimental comp? Like, you obviously ran it twice that week and kind of telegraphed, especially after the first time that it was common. Like, didn't you even pick the bot lane, like, first rotation or something? Like, the whole bot lane? Like, it was kind of like you were trying to like crowbar that comp into the game, right? It wasn't necessarily the best comp in the world to play.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we try new comps, it's just because we think the picks are strong. And like after the Saturday game versus TSM, we were like, yeah, like this worked really well. It was working really well in all our scrims. So we were like, you know what, like if they give it to us, we didn't expect them to give it to us. We thought they were going to ban it. So then like when they opened it in the game, we were like, okay, like we think it's strong. They obviously have something prepared into it or else they would have banned it. But like we think it's strong. So we're just going to go with it and see what happens.
What did you think of this comp, Crumbz? Because obviously it did work the first time, which made it look hilarious. But like, it almost feels like half trolling running a comp like that, like in a best of one. Like, I get that you obviously could win the game off it, but I think Cloud9 could win if they just did a normal draft.
Well, I think the first thing is that it puts your support on the back foot from the start. You're not getting somebody that's going to be able to roam around and actually influence much of your early plays. And it's not something that I think Cloud9 has played a ton, or at least on stage. Like, I don't know how the practice has been gone, but usually Vulcan's playing, I think it was like Spellbook Rakan, and that's going to be way more in the mix than your Senna that's usually hitting level 6. But what I focused on in that game wasn't even the bot lane picks, because I understand why I could see them being good before. You know, we've seen Mad Lions do it, but I was looking at the top lane matchup, specifically what happened in that second wave, fighting for level 3 with Someday, because I see you throwing the shock blast, be like, okay, this is gonna barely hit the creep, and then it's suddenly somehow like the creeps move around, and then you don't actually get to kill them. The aggro messes up, and then from that point onwards, it was like everybody has to go into the top lanes, and that's not how the Camille matchup versus Jace usually goes. I thought Jace wins early, Camille wins late, but it went the other way around. Camille won early, and then you won late.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something I was super practiced in. Just like, I mean, I wasn't practiced in it at all because I haven't played it recently. Because people just start picking that matchup. But I think it's actually a lot more even early than people think. And I was playing like too aggressively. Like he missed his first W in lane, so then I was like, okay, like I should be able to win now because like going into it, I was like, I think it's pretty even, but if I outplay him, but he like missed his first W and he had Comet. So I was like, okay, like I should win now. So I was playing really aggressive and then I like wasn't winning. So I was like, like obviously I have the wrong idea about this. And then I was forced to base early, which wasn't actually the end of the world. The problem came when we tried to gank him and he should have died, but I stepped too far behind him because I had my E to cancel his like hook shot out. But I stepped too far behind him, so he was able to go the other way, which was just like a mechanical mistake on my part.
So you were banking on interrupting his hook shot.
Yeah, I mean, with like Blaber was going to be there first, and like his wave was actually like, even though I was forced back first, the wave was in a bad spot for him. Yeah. And then like he should have died to that gank, and then you would have seen like a totally different game. But instead, I fumbled it, and then his jungler came up on the next timing, and then all of a sudden my wave's bad, and then I just died for free after that.
Are we, as like people in the media, analysts, are we trying to oversell like the storyline of Cloud9 by imagining that Cloud9 is actually purposely experimenting with different comps now, not just to win NA? I mean, listen, the old famous narrative, usually it was around TSM, was that because they put everything into literally just winning NA as the region, they didn't sometimes maybe expand their game and learn some of the things you might need to know when you go to international play, which, listen, it's like, it's not exactly an easy one to go down either side of, because, you know, you can't get the cart before the horse. You have to win NA usually to get to the international competition and ensure that. So there's a logic to it. But like, have some of the comps and some of the moves we've seen this year, Licorice, been about trying to do more than just win the best of one?
Biggest goal is always just to win. Like we are going to play things because we think they're strong and we think that we can win with them. And like different weeks, like first off, we have 5 really strong players, right, on Cloud9. So like on different weeks, people are going to be playing better and you're going to find it easier to play around different players. So I think like pretty naturally for us, we like have different comps that like work better some weeks. Like some weeks we're just like, oh yeah, like playing topside works really well. Or like some weeks just like playing around Sven and like stacking 4 dragons by 20 minutes is like really the go-to. But like we're always just trying to win, and since you like don't know what the world's meta is going to be, and usually it's like actually fairly like strict. Like usually there's like solo lanes are pretty strong. There's like strong bot lane picks, and then jungle's kind of supportive role. Like that has been like pretty standard for worlds for a long time. Like since you don't really know what it's going to be, like you should just play what you think is the strongest, and the thing that you should actually be practicing is like adapting as fast as possible. Right. And I think that's something we're really good at Cloud9.
Right, just to follow up on that, have there ever been attempts, for example, that this might sound weird, but the main criticism everyone gives of Cloud9 isn't really a criticism. It's like if they play fast and they get all this early game attention, they just win the game. It's like, yeah, that's good. Like that, they're doing an awesome job there. But I get what people mean. What they mean is, since nobody else can really stop that at the moment, it looks like the best chance has been EG and teams like that trying the similar thing, basically. Is there a logic to like, are you actually specifically as a team trying to try approaches that aren't just about stacking the early game? Is that a conscious thing? Or does that just happen if a draft just goes a certain way?
I mean, it definitely happens sometimes that you just end up like drafting more late game, and like it's something that like the meta has been changing recently, and it's something that a lot of teams are trying more, and we've been trying it too, with like pretty mixed success, I'd say, like on stage and in scrims too. But like I don't know, you just like as a team you always just have to play to your strengths, and like even if the meta shifts, you have to figure out a way to play the things that you're good at, even like in a certain meta, because like there's always going to be like the more scaling pick in a comp. Like even when you see like these Azir Corki matchups, like Azir has more early pressure. So like if you're an early pressure team, you probably want to be on that Azir side of the matchup, whereas the teams that are like playing for like that 60-minute win condition want like the Corki side of that matchup, for example.
So that actually is really a great way to transition into what I wanted to talk about when you're Kale game, because you mentioned that Blaber loves to go for these early scuttle, wants to be fighting for scuttle, but in this game, he finishes his path topside, wanting to take a 3v3 with the Kale at this stage in the game. So when you're taking these new champions, is it more about how comfortable you are on it or how it's going to affect the rest of the map? Because to me, that looked like a disconnect. We're like, oh yeah, we could still fight for this, right? And you're saying, well, hell no, I'm melee. Like, what? I can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, that one specifically was kind of funny because, I mean, I thought that Solo was going to stack a wave on me and that I was going to need help not getting dove, basically, because it's like Ornn is so tanky, level 3, and Kale is like quite useless, like under the tower if there's like a big wave crashing. So, like, that's why I was like, Blaber, I want you to come topside so I don't get dove, and like, then I'm like put super far behind from the start. And then like Solo didn't end up doing that for whatever reason. He like wanted the wave in the middle. And then like at first I was like, okay, like we don't want to fight the crab. But then like Niski and Blaber were like, oh, like our conditions are so good, we can fight it maybe. And then in the end it was actually like Vulcan who was like, no, guys, like please just like don't, like you're gonna lose the
Somebody
whole
else
game
had
right
to
there.
call it off.
But like I don't know, like we're just an aggressive team. Like I think a big part of that is Blaber, because like Blaber just like wants to get an advantage no matter where he goes or like what the state of the game is. But I don't know, like we just figure it out, and like we try to play around our champions as best we can, but you also have to play around like the players, you know, if that makes sense.
Is Blaber the main voice for the team? Because I heard during your brain checks that he's really excited and loud during a lot of the fights. Like, is he the one that's usually saying what's going on?
There's actually a bit of a joke on our team right now that Blaber's like a shoutcaster. Like when we're like team fighting, he's like, oh yeah, we'll be playing like Jarvan or something. He's like, big ult, like, oh nice skill shot, nice skill. We're like, so that's like it's obviously not like that bad, but it's like a bit of a joke in our team. But I think basically what happens is that Blaber is the most aggressive player on our team, and he's the one who just always wants to go in. So a lot of our calls do end up revolving around like Blaber wants to do this, like should we do this or should we do something else? And that's just like kind of how the decision making like tree like falls out.
What do you actually think about the way the game is played right now? Because in the modern day, people actually like aggressive style like that. They like it when the jungler's aggressive. They like it if we just have lots of follow-up, etc. There's not really the old thinking of where it's like you have to be really sure that the gank's going to work before you go for it. You can kind of just go for it now, right?
I mean, it depends. Like, obviously, if you think their jungler like is going to be there, you don't want to like dive or something like that. But as far as like ganking goes, if it's in a good spot, usually going first isn't going to put you at like some insane disadvantage. Like I think it could in the past, but it just doesn't feel that way right now. And I think jungle, especially like in particular, it feels like the role that can have the most like fumbles. If like
you can get away with a few.
Yeah, like when I'm playing top lane, if I make like one mistake and like my wave's fucked and like my mid jungler on the other side of the map, like my game's like over, right? Like I'm just like praying for like something random to happen, like maybe like kill TP bot, like get nothing, and I can like fix my lane or something. But like it feels like in jungle, you can die like a fair amount of times or like make a couple mistakes, and you're still able to like play the game and be strong. So I think because of that, it's actually really important to have a jungler that's gonna go for a lot of plays, because like you have the space to make mistakes.
Okay, what do you think, Crumbz?
Okay. I mean, that's very true, because top is definitely, you mess up the wave once and your jungler is not in a position to help you, you're just fucked entirely. Like, you're not going to be able to come back into the game for a long time. But that also puts Blaber into a completely different category then, because nobody else is really playing that way. I think a lot of junglers are playing how they play, to like a lane where you're trying to minimize as many mistakes as possible instead of just getting back out there and trying to find as many plays as they can on the map. Now, how much of your laning phase revolves around setting up your jungler then, instead of making sure that you are in a good position?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, actually, because like it's really based on. So like I'll have a matchup, right? And there's going to be certain things that I should be able to do in the matchup, and like certain things that I like might be able to do. Like sometimes in a losing matchup, I'll be able to get push anyways because I like know something they don't. But usually it's like, okay, like can I push level 3? And then, or can I push early? And then if I can push early, then it's like, okay, like Blaber could come to my lane early and we could go for the scuttle grab. Or like if like in a kill game, like, oh, I could get dove early, then like I want Blaber to come to my lane. But like if we have push everywhere, for example, then it's totally up to him, like where he wants to go. Because like obviously he wants to go somewhere with push so he can get those crabs and like get that XP advantage, or like maybe look for like a small invade or something, like invade the Raptors or the Krugs or just like something like that. So at the end of the day, it kind of is up to him. Like if we really think like he like wants to do this so that he doesn't like get messed up and like you're on your own, like good luck, you know, then like that's just the way the game's gonna go. So like I feel like I haven't actually answered your original question.
You kind of have, right? You're like, how much of it revolves around setting up your lanes, and you're saying, well, you know, you're trying to do as much as you can to set him up, but if you all achieve setting up your lane, then he can pick from wherever, and so it just makes the map entirely open versus like only one person trying to do that. So everybody's trying to set him up, but then it's up to him to choose what to do next. So that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, like basically everyone's trying to pressure as much as they can all the time, and like sometimes you need your jungler to do that, and sometimes you don't. So like Blaber goes where he thinks he can do the most for himself, and then you just kind of figure it out for them from there.
It's just such a contrast, because I don't know if you remember this, Thorin, too, but how many years ago was it where jungle was jungle slave? Like this is now the team is almost slave to the jungle at this stage for Cloud9 at least.
Sure. What do you think of that, though, Licorice? Listen, your team's obviously the best at the moment, so you have reasons to like it. But what do you think of how that actually plays for a top laner? Like, do you like it? Do you prefer the way it was before?
Well, I've never really, like, apart from my first split on Cloud9 when I didn't really know what I was doing and Dennis helped me out a lot, like, I was never really a player that was played around a ton. Like, I get resources, but I'm never usually the like main carry of the team where you like put all the resources into me and I'm supposed to like run around and kill everyone. And like that just hasn't been the way that like I've played or the teams I've been on have played, and it's like always going to be kind of a mix of the two. But there are still teams that play that way. Like I think probably like 100 Thieves would be a pretty good example where they're like trying to just put everything they can into Someday still and like hope that he carries the game, and it can work. Like the game isn't really limited to like one style, but I would say that it is frustrating sometimes for me playing against teams that play that way, because I'm just like, man, like I can't win my lane. Like no matter how much better I am or how well I'm playing it, I can play it like pixel perfect, and like I'm still not going to be able to like look good in the game or like pass the eye check, because I'm going to be like down CS, down a turret, like he's going to be running around, maybe killing people. So that part of it can be really frustrating.
So what's different between you playing carry champions then versus say Someday playing carry champions? Because you played you're not really playing tanks this split. You're playing a lot of carries, but not necessarily getting a lot of help. What is your goal in these carry matchups? Because it seems like it's all about, okay, I get a little bit of a lead and now I can TP and try to make a TP play down there, and hopefully we're sufficiently far ahead that I don't have to make more of these plays, and then we just win from having proper pressure matchups in your lane assignments. So like what are your goals playing these carry picks if you're not getting as much help?
Well, for me, I like to pick the picks that I think are the strongest. And like, so if you look at a matchup, you know, say like Jace versus Horn, right? Like there's kind of like, okay, if my team's winning, I should be on the orange side, because then like I'm going to absorb pressure and then I'm going to like show up in team fights and like do something. But the way I see it is that Jace, if you play it really, really well, like you have a really excellent laning phase, even if they like look at you a couple times, you will be up pressure, you'll be up tempo, and you like when Jace gets items, he can like one-shot your backline. So if you actually are pushing and you can move to fights first and you get like maybe a TP advantage somewhere in there, like you will do more than the Ornn. And like the Ornn is kind of waiting for you to mess up, and that's the side of the matchup that I just don't want to be on generally.
Now waiting on somebody else's mistake, right? Like you want to be assertive on it.
Yeah, like that. Like when I go to Worlds and I play against the best players in the world and I pick Ornn to Jace, I just like I sit there and I lose. You know, like I'm like hoping for them to make a mistake, and then like maybe like they have like pressure like mid or bot or something, and then that's just like the game's just over, because I'm just sitting there and I like was waiting for them to make a mistake and then nothing happened, so then it's over. And like that just feels so awful to play. And I think like at the highest level you have to be able to pick these like pressure lanes and just like pressure as much as you can, and you should be able to do more than your opponent.
The only thing is, though, when you're on a team like yours, where, as you say, you're not exactly being played around most of the time, like, if you actually do a successful job pressuring, right, you just bait at that point in time. Like, isn't the other just jungler just waiting to come in on you?
Yeah, and then, like, the jungler is going to look at you, it's your job to not die, and then, like, if you don't die, you're, like, even CS. Like, I think in, like, the Kale versus Ornn game that I just played versus FlyQuest, like, I was, like, super scared of, like, Pantheon for a significant portion of the game, and also like Trundle because we like didn't see him and didn't have a ton of vision, like, and we never really were able to like build vision on top side for me to pressure. So I was just like chilling, you know, like I was just hanging out, like I wasn't gankable, I wasn't diveable, I was up like 5 CS or like something like really tiny, but because they like were trying to look top side, like they couldn't play the game, so it just felt really easy.
Well, that's kind of the same matchup where you would be the Ornn into the Jace, where you're hoping that the Ornn just messes up or that they don't go anything against you early, and if they don't, then okay, now you win. Like,
yeah, like he's waiting.
Similar?
He's waiting for me to like overstep in the lane. He didn't build a wave to dive, but like, of course, if he did, I like, called Blaber, so I had Blaber there for that. And then like after 6, like he's really just like hoping that I like make a mistake. I like walk into his queue because like like you have to be like running at him, take the queue, like be in front of it for him to like chunk you. So it's super hard.
You're saying you're thinking like one step ahead of the play for FlyQuest, and then they failed to get to that point. Like, oh, I guess they're not there. They didn't even think about like being able to abuse this from the Kale. Is there a team that actually gets to think that? Obviously, I think during the losses maybe that happened, but is there a team that you can consistently be like, oh, okay, that they're thinking about the same kind of plays that we're going for, or we know we can't be susceptible to?
Well, I mean, my main point was that like you should pick pressure lanes, and then you should make sure they fit a cohesive team comp. Because if they don't fit a cohesive team comp, you're probably gonna like if you make a couple mistakes. And I think this is like kind of a big problem for us in our losses, where especially in the EG game, where we like flubbed one dragon team fight, and then it felt like we just like couldn't team fight anymore. We were just like, wow, like this game is like actually unplayable. So like we want to have cohesive team comps. And then we want to do that while picking as many pressure lanes as possible, because like that is just the easiest way to play the game and like where you have the most say in how it's going to play out.
Let's talk a little bit about that game then, because in this particular match, obviously the strangest thing is if you told someone at the beginning of the split, like one of the teams that beats Cloud9 the split is Evil Geniuses, most people would say, yeah, I could see that happening one time. You know, it's not unreasonable. They have the right style. But obviously people wouldn't realize we're talking about like the role swap team where they've got Uni playing in the top lane now, and they brought Golden Glue in for this week. So what did you actually have much reconnaissance on this particular version of EG? Did you scrimmed against them at all, Licorice?
No, generally there's like a 2-week blockout
right
before like you play when you play a team in 2 weeks, you don't scrim them anymore during that 2-week period.
Okay.
So that like you don't show them strats, they don't show you strats, because otherwise it just gets awkward because you're like, well, we don't want to practice like certain things. And so there's like a 2-week blockout, and they made their roster changes like the week, like that week. So like we didn't have any chance to see them. We saw them play their game on Friday where they looked pretty bad against Team Liquid actually. But I think like I don't know, that game, we've talked about it a lot. I think there was just a pretty big mismatch between like I think a lot of our problems came from our draft. So in the draft, I was like, we had like 4 Smurf champions, right? And then we got to 5th pick, and they picked GP blind which is like a bit of an ego move, but like I think it was kind of okay in that game. And at that point, like if we had recognized that like we had like this like what we call a Smurf comp, where it's like, okay, like we have 5 champs that like don't work together. We have 4 champs that don't work together well, that like just need to win lane. Then we should have just picked like Lucian, the 5th champ that like doesn't work together well and like just needs to win lane. And that is kind of like where that would have been the adjustment that I think should have been made in that draft. Where like, okay, like we don't have a cohesive team comp, whatever, like. Because I was looking at our 4 champs, I'm like, well, we have no tank, like no,
it's hard to pull off.
No front line, like nothing like that. And I was like, okay, I should pick like something like Set, so that we have some front line, some engage, like some like something that our carries can stand behind. But in hindsight, I think it was the wrong choice, and like it was like a band-aid fix to just a bad draft in the first place, basically.
Was this your first ever loss on Set?
I think so, yeah. We don't lose a lot, and Set is
Because, like
pretty
you say, as individual champions, like if you have Set and then Blaber has like Lee Sin, that already looks good. But I see what you mean in the context of this actual match. Bit harder to make work, sure.
Yeah, I mean, GP is just like, it was such a good pick into like Ashe and with Syndra mid, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have Ashe, Syndra, Bard, and like if you GP alt Ashe, Syndra, Bard, and they're like grouped together, like they're out of the team fight. You know, like GP can't be allowed to play that game. Basically, like with the team comp we had, because like they have Alistar going in. Alistar is gonna be able to stop a lot of Lee Sin's plays as well, and it's just gonna be like really, really, really hard to play the game if that GP like is in the game whatsoever. So you need to pick something that just like takes them out.
So you would have rather had doubling down on this comp already is messed up. Let's just see if we're good enough to win the laning phase instead of trying to take the fight that we know is an uphill battle, which is dealing with the team fight 5v5.
Yeah, like I think once you draft that way, like you should just like full commit to it. Just pick Lucian, just try to push all 3 lanes and just like, just win as fast as possible.
Would you have taken Jace, because you got your Jace banned I think both games this weekend too?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I might have taken Jace. I think Jace is like a little bit safer than Lucian because it's like more long range, more pokey. I honestly couldn't tell you. Like I wasn't thinking about it since they banned it.
What do you think of EG overall, though? Because I think the interesting thing about this move for me is initially people just heard the golden glue side of the move. So they thought, right, is this some move they've specifically done? Because actually, I've noticed it, even when I talked to EG players on talk shows, they'll kind of admit themselves that the reason that teams had some like really weird mid-drafts, for example, is like Jizuka just plays the way Jizuka's going to play. So they've been trying with the champions initially to sort of like change how he's playing. Because the big problem at the moment basically is if you want to play like a European side lane game, he's a brilliant player for it. But if you want to play like control dragon fights with the control mage, that's not really Jizuka's style. So like if they were going off that logic, I could actually have seen, even though people are going to think Jizuka is way better than Golden Glue, it's like not necessarily that thing though. Like I can see why there's a logic there. But it seems actually, if you look at it, like this is more about bringing Uni into the lineup, that they want to give him some play. And then obviously for next year, in theory, like he becomes like a resident or whatever, and then they can just use whatever 5 players they want because you can only have so many imports, obviously. What do you think on this, Crumbz, like the new EG lineup, if they keep using this one?
I think I believed Artemis and that he said that a lot of it was the communication aspect, that they wanted to also free up Zeyzal. I don't know how good Jizuka is in comms, but I know Golden Glue is pretty active on them.
Right.
Zeyzal looked so much better in like when he was able to play the Alistar than any other game. I think that was by far his best game of the split. And if that you're telling me that just having a mid laner that maybe isn't as aggro, but at least allows your support to be doing stuff like that, then I'm all on board for it, because the Alistar, I think, really won a lot of the fights just being able to flank and just made it like such a nightmare. I know Golden Glue had a good game, but how did you feel about the Alistar oppression? Because I know in a lot of the TP plays that you're trying to make, like you just can't get into that champion.
Yeah, I mean, Alistar was a really nasty champion into our team comp, and it also is like maybe like Zeyzal's favorite champion. It's
Sure.
if not his favorite, it's like up there. It's like top 3 for sure, and like one of his favorite picks to pull out. So like I think it was a mistake on our part to give him a draft that like he could pick Alistar into, and where it was just so strong.
What do you think about their team overall, though?
I still need to see more. It's too polarizing. It's too polarizing to see such a terrible game against Team Liquid and then another one against C9, where C9 flobs the draft as well. So I think that if they were up against a team that had a more even draft to what they had, or at least doubled down, and hey, we might just try to beat you in lane, and then you understand what they're going for, then you could see it. But they looked like Golden Glue could play Zoe and that Zeyzal can play Alistar. Those were like the 2 biggest ones that I saw.
Sure.
Like, yeah, sure, that looks fine, but yeah, you can play. What was the jungler? I think it was Volibear.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, not a lot of skill display here.
Because actually, that's one of the... Yeah, go on. What were you going to say?
I mean, I was going to say that like I think that Golden Glue for Jizuke might even be a straight upgrade in the current meta, just because like when you look at teams like G2, and I know Grabs did like an interview on the LEC where he's like, man, like we don't know how to play anymore, because like usually we like used to trade like top tower for dragon and like back pressure for dragon, but then it's like you're forced to team fight these dragons because the soul is so strong, and the side lane champions the Jizuke picks just aren't going to be as strong in these team fights as like the Zoe or the Orianna or the Azir. So I think like for the meta, Golden Glue could just like, even without considering like the Huni gets to come in, it could just be an upgrade.
Yeah.
Still need to see more consistent games though, because the Zoe can look good, but you know what happens when you have a Zoe that feels it one day and then the other one, like not a single bubble hits, and you're like, well, why did we even pick this champion?
Thing is, though, like I actually did. It's weird because normally I'm someone who's more like narrow-minded. Like if I think one player is better, I usually think just better to find a way to play around that guy. But I could see the logic to this move. Like it seems like for what they want to accomplish, actually makes sense. I even think as well, Ajuki definitely could be the best player on that team. Like he looked like an amazing pop-off player when he got his champions. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily sure that is actually how his jungle and support want to play the game all the time, though. Like Svenskaren's not Blaber. Like he's more of a control jungler to me. So I can see the logic to this. It just makes me interested though to see what the meta will be for Worlds, because this is a team obviously that has a very good chance from going from NA. But I don't know what they would do then, because unless they've changed the rules, aren't the rules still that you're only allowed to take one substitute Licorice?
Yeah, you're allowed one sub and one emergency sub too. So maybe
that'll be a tough
maybe
choice
be an
like
emergency, you know.
True.
That's still so hard to pull off though. Like having that sub system, like wasn't it only? It was only SKT that really did it the best, where you actually had somebody that could sub in, and then you won a game. Like you straight up didn't just downgrade your roster during an important match.
Yes. Yeah,
I know we struggled with it 2 years ago, I think, in our first Worlds, when like we wanted to bring Grayson and Svenskeren and Blaber. I forget which jungler was starting. I think Svenskeren was actually starting. So it was Blaber. We wanted to bring Blaber and Grayson as subs, but we were only allowed one. So in the end, we chose Blaber.
So how do you feel about if Fudge were the substitute here? Like because you're playing a lot of 1v1s against him still, right? Would he be the one that's ready from C9 Academy to go up into LCS if you had to take a sub?
He might be the most LCS ready of any player on our Academy roster. I think he is kind of the carry of that team right now, and I would say he is the strongest player, but he is also an import, at least for like he is not an import in an Academy. He's like an emerging regions player. Right, but if he was in the LCS, he would still count as an import like FBI and Ryoma. So as of right now, he can't be our sub. So I'm not sure what that discussion will look like on who we'll actually end up bringing.
Right, let's get into. I want to talk about Team Liquid a bit now, because it's very unusual to me that this team has as many wins as they do, and yet every discussion seems to be why they're not legit and how they're like, these are all, it's like smoke and mirrors, and we've imagined all these wins have stacked up somehow. What do you think, Licorice? Are they like in scrims, for example, do they look like one of the best teams?
In scrims, they've been one of our toughest opponents, if not the toughest for us. And like, we still have a winning record against everybody, but like they have been like fairly strong in scrims. I think that where a lot of people like have issues is that their like strength of victory, if that's a thing, is like very low.
Sure.
I mean, their win against EG was like pretty good, and their wins more recently have been better, but like early on the split, like they did not look like a 8-2 team. Like they looked like a middle of the pack. Like they like scraped some wins out here and there. But in scrims, they've looked stronger than they have on stage, I think, as well.
I'll give you the perfect example for that is that against 100 Thieves, they lose a play in the top red side. The same play that 100 Thieves did against Cloud9. Team Liquid gets smoked by it. And then it's Jensen single-handedly alongside Corey JJ trying to pick up the game with Zoe. They're even, they have a goal lead, and then you've got Brock says 0-0-0, 31 minutes in. Like, but there's been like 16 kills on the maps thus far, and no part of either. And that's one when you're thinking this is not a cohesive way to come back into a game. Like this is just not a strength of schedule or a strength of victory bonus for a Team Liquid. Then you've got that game against Dignitas, the old backdoor, like that long fucking drawn out game where Freak loses his mind. What are the other ones?
IMT. Where they whipped the Malphite Orianna ult, or they would have won the game.
Yeah, they should have lost that one. The early one against Golden Guardians, where they lost the early game, and then just they gave up Ocean Soul and still won the game because Impact just found a single pick. I mean, the list just goes on. Like, these are just not strong wins, but then you've got single-handed players making out incredible plays, which is why you're like, okay, these guys are pretty
most of them
good.
Pretty good individually at the moment, right?
Yeah, like Jensen and Core are making pop-off plays, tacticals being solid, so it's hard to beat them if you have 3 people that are world caliber making individual plays against a region that doesn't have that many players that can keep up.
What do you think, Licorice?
About Team Liquid?
Yeah.
I mean, they're just not good at playing as a team, but they're strong individually. So they're getting wins that, like, probably they shouldn't. And if they don't, like, fix their gameplay or, like, figure out a way to play more cohesively in a team, I, like, don't see them doing well internationally at all when you just, like, can't beat players that hard. Like, you can't outclass players, like, by that wide of a margin unless you're, like, legitimately the best in the world. And I don't think anyone on Team Liquid is actually the best in the world. I think that's a pretty fair statement. But like, I don't know. It's really hard to say. Like, we play them this weekend. I'm not sure entirely what to expect because, like, they play like a very similar style every game too. Like, they like to have a tank in the top lane, something like tanky either in jungle or support, and then like 2 carries that they play around in mid and AD. So they're like a very standard team, and their wins are like wins. They've been winning. It's actually it was kind of frustrating on our end actually that like we lost two games and all of a sudden we're like tied with Team Liquid when like we feel like we've been like much stronger in the LCS, but that's just like the way the standings have been.
Thing is, what you say there, I think, is why it's actually one of the reasons I also actually thought they would be one of the better teams in terms of record at the very least. Is when they lost Doublelift, it actually sort of streamlined the team. Like, you look at the historical trends of the players on this team, it should obviously be a mid and AD team at that point in time. Impact's more famous for playing obviously the weak side anyway, and he's not going to have perfect comms. And then Broxer, like I assumed if they were doing this well, he would have been better integrated. But I kind of agree with you actually. If you ever look like on the scoreboard, mate, you wouldn't even believe that like junglers get assists or something. Like, this guy never seems to be around when any of the kills happen. Like, fair play's not in, like, that's good. But it's bizarre. It's very bizarre to see a team so high up in the rankings and the jungler not really be like, doesn't really fit with the players that he plays with. But it doesn't do a bad job necessarily. He just doesn't get exploited. I'm not sure why. I mean, admittedly, jungle not the strongest position in LCS.
So I think it's just that he's having a hard time playing the carry junglers, which is like all he's playing in the first place. But like, specifically the Graves, like the Graves it's not really as aggressive as you want the Graves to be. Like, you want the Graves to be focused entirely on living in the enemy side, like just being as aggro as possible. And then the Lee, you just need to be super flashy mechanically. Like, you need to be making kick flashes off cooldown, like really to make Lee such a viable pick. So if the team's not setting you up, you're never going for these plays. Right? If you're not working with them, you're never counter jungling because that usually depends on the rest of your team to help you out. Or you're not going for these solo picks if you're not grouped up with the team in the first place. So like the plays that he needs to make don't fit the champion pool. But it's weird because those are the wins that they have for the most part. Like, their losses come off the tanks in the Trundle and a Graves game that was against you guys, but it was against you guys.
Yeah.
True. Does seem like Jensen's got a lot better this split though. Like, I actually thought almost the whole time Doublelift was there was some disconnect between him and that team. Like, he was never that sick when he was on Team Liquid, even though they were winning the championship. That wasn't like the Jensen from Cloud9 back in the day. That guy used to be a monster. He looks way more like that now. Like, he's coming back to peak form, I feel like.
Yeah, I think he's playing a lot better this split in particular than he has in the past, for sure. And he's looking like a really strong mid right now.
Now, I want to ask you about, I saw Vulcan saying that after the 100 Thieves loss, that you guys maybe were not taking scrims as seriously as you should have before. And then maybe the loss is a bit of a wake-up call. Hey, let's go ahead and go through this. Like, how is your motivation through this split going? Because World's still up in the air, right? There's a lot of things that are still undetermined. What's going on in that department? Because I know I personally would feel like somewhat lost. Like, well, what's happening, right? If we do as best as we can here, but still don't have the opportunity to show off or to compete against the best in the world, how excited am I going to be to continue that?
I mean, for me, I'm reasonably confident that Worlds is going to happen, and apart from that, like I don't want to think about it more than that because I think it's just not helpful. Like it's not something that I want to think about, and honestly, like our focus has to be like winning NA again first. Like our focus is going to be winning the next championship in summer, and then we'll start thinking about Worlds, and like that's the way it should be. And as far as like Scrim motivation goes, my take on it is more that we got fairly lax with like making sure that we were practicing things that we were going to play on stage, where I think we got a lot more experimental in scrims, and I think that now we're trying to return more to like, okay, like what are we actually going to play on stage? Like let's make sure that we're practicing that as much as possible instead of just like playing like as many random matchups as we think are good, and just like making sure our scrims are like more focused.
Wasn't there a difference between how European teams wanted to approach scrims, which was that they see scrims as the opportunity to go all about experimental and less so about what you're going to be playing on stage? Like, is that what you guys have landed on? The best way for you to improve is we need to play what we're going to play on stage instead of experimentation, or else it leads to losses?
I mean, I think you need both, and I think like you can just swing like more one way or the other, and then like obviously you're gonna have to like find a way to like fix that, because like if you're only experimenting in scrims, you're gonna look all over the place on stage, and if you're only trying what you know is good, you're gonna fall behind the meta at a certain point. And the way we've usually done it on Cloud9 is like the first couple days of scrims, we'll like try out new things that we think are good, and if you like think something's good, you like tried it out, or you saw it solo queue, or you like were trying it on the Monday, which is your off day, then like you can bring it to scrims, and then like Thursday and Friday, like the days leading up to your matches, are a lot more about like playing what you're playing on stage. And I think we went away from that a bit, and we're just trying to make more of a return to that kind of like setup for our scrims now.
Okay.
What do you think about where TSM is at the moment, Crumbz?
Oh man, the defense of the Dark Arts position is looking like they're about to be unveiled as the new villain. That's where that's what it feels like. Like suddenly, all right, time for something in the jungle's got to change, because Spica ran it down this week, and it was too bad. It was too obvious. I don't know what's going on with the team, but that role in particular needs to be a lot better, because if the game revolves so much around the jungle right now, which it does, and souls are so important, you cannot have that role be the one that's costing you games. So they need to make sure that Spica is actually playing a lot better. And I don't know if you saw closely what happened during the game against 100 Thieves, and then the one against FlyQuest. I mean, the FlyQuest one was just a disaster, but the 100 Thieves one, I think it was first dragon taken at 12 minutes from both teams.
Got it.
What's happening? and the Herald, it was actually like an 11-minute Herald with the dragon being up the whole time. When you have an Olaf and a Graves, like, why is you guys not going for this objective? This is how you win.
Yeah, I didn't see either of the TSM games too closely this week. I just saw the ending of the 100 Thieves game where they pulled off another miracle backdoor, and then seems to be a common trend in NA this split. It was a European thing, like last split, or was it last year? I don't remember, but now it seems to be an LCS strategy. And then I saw a little bit of their loss against FlyQuest as well.
What do you think about where they are as a team? I mean, obviously they're even trying like this move where they brought in treats instead of Biofrost. That they're trying something, trying to make something different happen. It's interesting because if you look at the overall record, sure, there's a lot of parity in the league, but they're still in third place. So you'd think, in theory, if they were happy with what they had so far, you stick with the same team and you just say, we'll make a strong push. But this move, to me, the substitution suggests even they know they're like on the brink. Because some of these weeks, they either have the 2-0 week or they look really bad and they have the 0-2 / we lose one really bad game, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing to remember is that teams have so much more information than like the fans do, just because they play so many scrims. And I'm sure that like they were having issues with Biofrost in scrims where like he like wasn't holding up, or he was like messing up mechanically, or maybe his comms weren't good. Like it's like pretty useless to speculate, but like obviously there was something that they didn't like about what he was doing, so they thought that it was time for a change. And like fans only see like the games that are played on stage, so when you look at the stage games, a lot of times people are like, oh, like why are they making this move? This player is like looked fairly consistent on stage, but there can be problems that you just like don't see, especially in a best of one format, because there just aren't like there isn't that much data to pull from.
Now, how much of that data do you think comes from, say, solo queue? Because I know Vulcan and Sven love to duo. They're usually up there in solo queue, but then you see someone like Bio and Doublelift, and from the streams I've seen, if it's Bio versus Doublelift against Sven and Vulcan in solo queue, it's not close. I mean, it's usually gonna be Sven and Vulcan like just crushing that matchup, and even if it's not with their duos, like Bio's not having such a easy time against somebody like Vulcan. So do you think solo queue plays into it like to some degree, or especially more in the duo role versus like if you're playing solo, like your own LP might not be such a big deal, but if suddenly you're duoing with Blaber and then in those solo queue games you mess up every single play that's gone for, that has to play into it, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, definitely when you duo with someone, there's like a little more pressure on you that like you want to, because you always want to like prove yourself as a player. You always want to like have the trust of your teammates, and like you can lose the trust of your teammates by playing with them in solo queue and like consistently doing bad. Like that is totally something that can happen. I think it's just going to be more rare than scrims because like, I mean, every day you're forced to play 5 games with all your teammates, so it's just more likely for it to happen there.
Right, one thing we talked about on the first episode I did of this series with Crumbz was we were discussing how limited, in contrast to the other major regions, NA has been for top lane champion pool. Actually, like over in one thing we were talking about was it's amazing how many Volibear games have actually been played in NA. I know a lot of them were by Kumo initially, but like the sheer amount was like disproportionate, dude. When I was going and looking at like LPL, LCK, they have 1 million counter picks to these sorts of picks that you can't just blind stuff over there. Like they play everything basically. Like for example, I was looking up today, like in LCS you barely ever see Kennen played. Dude, if you go look at the best Asian top laners, they'll have like 5 games of Kennen themselves. So like there's certain picks just aren't making it over. So with LCS at the moment, what do you think of where the top lane pool is at?
It's been getting better. Like I like talked about it a little bit early on when people were picking like Aatrox and Ornn. I mean, Aatrox is like the biggest defender. Like you should not be picking that champion. It's just not like especially blind. It has so many counters. It's like one of those picks where you're just like hoping the opponent's going to mess up and you're going to get to play the game. And then on top of that, it's not really that good against like the bot lane and mid laners right now. So even if they mess up and you get a lead, you're still useless like a fair amount of the time. So like I hate Aatrox. Aatrox has been gone. So I'm happy about that. I think people are getting better about it. And like I think Hanser played a Kennen game. I think that's the only Kennen game I've seen. But
you played KO too before you picked it up.
Why don't you play Licorice? Feels like it would work for Cloud9.
Kennen? Yeah, I think it's a solid pick. It's something you can just blind. Like I think that's what a lot of regions are using, where like if the Wukong is gone and like these other picks are gone, people kind of like gravitate towards just like, oh yeah, I'll just blind Kennen. Like it's totally fine. And I think in some rare cases it's being used as a counter, but mainly it's just like a good blind pick right now because top lane is just so much about being able to bring like good team fighting presence right now, and like that's something they can bring. So I think it's like a totally fine pick in the meta. I don't think it's like some super strong staple pick that like if you don't see it there's like problems, but it's something you can pick right now. It's strong, it's good. There's other picks that are strong and good, but if you like Kennen, you can pick it.
What do you think about the Malphite? Because I've been loving Malphite since the beginning of this, just since this whole year, really, because to me, it's an easier Ornn. You need to engage. You don't know how to play Ornn. Just press R, press to win. LEC just went crazy with it last week. Yes. Even some games here, LCS started to pick it up. Like, decent laning phase, pretty easy team fight. You expect to see a lot more Malphite. It's not that easy to punish in lane.
I mean, Malphite is really hard to blind as a pick because there's a lot of things that can like punish you. I think the most like obvious or like the worst is like they pick Sylas and then they have Malphite. Yeah, but it's also Sylas.
That's a terrible one.
And then you're like, oh god, like like it's Malphite, but then he has like 3 more spells after he ults in instead of like just the ult.
And he heals.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny to see Malphite come back. I mean, it's always been like when you can pick it, it's always been a pretty strong pick, but it's like, to me, it's kind of funny because you've seen all these players say for so long, like, oh yeah, like if they have Malphite, you just flash the ult and it's like useless, you know, like it's like this like player hubris where
Yes.
you're like, oh, like that champion's useless because it's so easy to outplay, and then people are picking an LCS, and it's like, oh, like no, you're not flashing the ult actually. You like aren't able to do that consistently, so you're just dying in the Malphite. I think like the IMT TL game was like the biggest example of that, where like the carries were just getting hit by Malphite ult every team fight, and they like should have ended up losing off of that.
Yes. That's what's funny is even pro players can go full Reddit. Because you know the joke is like every time there was like a big outplay on Reddit, there's always that guy who's like, what he should have done was like sidestep that ability, then like dodged over and then clenched. It's like, mate, no one can do any of this shit. We're not Uzi in the Matrix. Like no one can. But the joke is like people actually, even who are pros, do that. Like I remember last year, or that was in the spring when I had actually an episode where Febevan came on, an LEC episode, and he basically straight up said like at that point in time in the mid lane, all the mid laners looked down on LeBlanc and said it like shouldn't be played in pro play because it just worked. He would just pick it every week anyway. Like it doesn't matter like what the theory is. Like it just works. Like people did what you wanted against it, and it didn't matter that like you know on paper if you did like some big like Einstein equation on a chalkboard, like it's not supposed to be able to be played. It just is. What I wanted to ask you is this, Licorice, is what is your vision right now? You kind of alluded to it there. Like what is the job of a top laner in LCS? Because the other thing is, first of all, I think it's the weakest role in NA at the moment. Like I look who the players are. Dude, it's hard to pick out like a top 3 or 4 and have most of them even be on the top teams right now. Like it's not great for that role. And then on top of that, even the teams that in theory have strong top laners, someday on 100 Thieves, they don't always play around him. Hooney's only just come back, and even then if he's playing fucking Black Gangplank, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a carry player every game. Like in this world, there's not a lot of carries coming out of the top. Like people aren't trying to basically push the game through top lane, right? So what's your job in that sense?
I mean, my issue with top lane right now is that like their recent champion releases, like the Volibear, Wukong, and Set in particular, are these champions that are just so insanely strong early game that like, and they're also good at team fighting. I mean, with the exception of Volibear, like Wukong and Set, I want to focus on mainly, where they're these champions that like win early game, and then they show up in team fights and they one-shot your backline. If they get like the proper like Set gets a tank onto your backline's dead. If Wukong gets a flank, your backline's dead. So when these champions push early and then they're strong late, they can kind of just like muddle through the mid game and like, you know, like maybe I'll go down a couple CS and I'll still be useful. So top lane has just become a lot about team fighting, I think, and like a little bit less about individual outplay, because it's just so hard to get a lead that matters. Like even in the game versus EG, like before, I mean, I flubbed the first, I think it was the second dragon we like fought in bot lane. I really fucked that up. That was really bad by me. But like before that, I had like a 30 CS lead in lane as the Set versus the Gangplank. Like I had a really strong laning phase, and it like didn't matter at all, really. Like I showed up to that fight. I had Bork boots like to GP's like Sheen boots like Ruby Crystal or something. Like it's so irrelevant like that I have that 30 CS lead, because like GP is just gonna be strong in team fights and I'm just gonna be strong. Like it just feels so hard to punish top laners 1v1 and like actually like push them out of lane or like take their towers or dive them or anything like that, because like they're just gonna be strong anyways.
Shouldn't then more mages show up into the top lane? I know Huni's playing a ton of Rumble. You know, GP makes a lot of sense, but then you could go as far as being like, hey, maybe I want to pick up Karthus top and then just sit here. If my if my mid doesn't really matter, I can just sit here, farm the whole waves, and just completely win the game with pressing R later on.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could, but it also has to be strong into like the meta picks, and I think like that's like the Wukong, where like Wukong is kind of like, in my opinion, it's kind of like the bar for top lane, where like either you have to outlane Wukong or you have to out team fight him, and there's like it's really hard to out team fight him, and if you pick Karthus into Wukong, you're gonna die, like because like he's just gonna kill you when he hits 6, and like it's just so hard to punish picks that. I don't know. You just pick something that's strong for team fighting. You try to get as much pressure as you can, so you get as many windows, and that's where like the picks like the Jace come from. Where like Jace can be really strong in team fights if you're winning lane, but like you just have to pick something that fits your team comp and can win lane.
Are you actually enjoying that type of a meta then? Because like, listen, it's what if you win in theory, it's it's good for you guys. But like, I have to say, the one area, like as a viewer, I'm enjoying some of the games, but I also do feel like it's only an illusion of choice that most of the teams have. Like you said before, majority of the time they just have to fight around whatever dragon comes up. That's just the game right now. Like, there's not really the choice of like for example, it's an extreme fringe case, but I'll give this example anyway. Last year at Worlds, when G2 had that series against SK Telecom, where they were just like giving up all the dragons, but then finding some like miracle fucking trade elsewhere on the map, or like it shouldn't really have been possible, but it was an amazing game as a result. Because you were like, how are they doing this? Like, now that game couldn't even exist. Basically, like that would just be a pointless match. Like, they would just lose the game basically. So, do you actually enjoy like the setup of the game at the moment, the meta game?
I love it. I just it feels super limiting. I think like the top lane champion pool has a pretty big part in that too, where like champions are useful no matter what. I think I wasn't like super clear on my point earlier, but like these champions are useful no matter what. That's like the biggest problem. Where you saw like there was the CLG versus IMT game where they like heavily focused topside. They got Ruin ahead on the Camille, and then they were just like, they went to team fight the like third Ocean Dragon, and they were already out comped, and they just lost anyways. And it's just like, okay, what is even the point? Like, you just pick. Like, it's just so hard to do anything meaningful as a solo player right now. It feels like with like bot lane getting nerfed and mid lane going to like these control mages like Syndra, Orianna, Azir that are like shouldn't really be getting like huge advantages in lane phase. Like, the whole game is just like a team game right now, and it can. So
it's like they've nerfed the champions, and now the map's OP. Now you have to get the dragons or whatever.
Yeah,
there's a logic to that. Yeah.
Can you pull it off those picks? Like, where I see these top lane picks actually working is when you're running TF or when you're running Gallia. Like, those are pretty much like the two instances where, okay, if somebody wants to play through top lane, it seems like it can be pushed to an actual win through with these picks. Like, I think it's LCK, LPL love to take TF Camille or something, and then just go top lane from level 3 onwards, just set him behind like 6 kills, and now you can actually win through the top side. Do you actually need that much of an advantage to be able to say, now the split pusher can be good enough in the team fight, or doesn't even need to team fight at all?
I mean, I think you're going to be forced to team fight no matter what. Like, I think that's just how the game works right now. Like, no matter how far ahead you are, unless you were able to like get the first 2 dragons or something like that, then you could like choose to not team fight the rest of the game. But like, that's like a very fringe case. I mean, I think like TF is a strong pick. Like, you can snowball like top lane with carries that way, but at the same time, you also have to be getting those dragons, because if you just ult every time to top lane and then they like give up properly and they have like Ornn into your Camille, and Ornn just like sits under the tower. Like, even in that CLG game, like Alorum died a lot. Like, he died a lot more than he had to, and it didn't matter at all. Like, obviously CLG could have executed better at the same time, but like, they got as many kills as they could have hoped to in that top lane, and as big as a lead as they could have hoped to, and it like didn't end up mattering at all at the end of the game. So it's hard. And also for Galio is a really strong team fighter. So that, like, it's totally different from the TF in my opinion.
I've got a question for you. Okay. Right. This is one of those ones where it's almost like there's a lag on how narratives catch up to reality. So like, it actually doesn't feel weird to be like, why is FlyQuest just a sort of middle of the table team? It's like, this is who they always were supposed to be. This actually makes perfect sense if you look at the players they have. So I'm not being harsh, but where do you think FlyQuest's at the moment? Like, they've clearly had a fall from grace somewhat, and I realise they've done this in the past years as well, but they've still got a decent enough team. So what do you think of them at the moment? Because I know all the Cloud9 players I talked to always said like they were a good scrim partner and stuff, and they were one of the more serious teams or something.
Well, FlyQuest actually doesn't want to scrim us anymore. So
that explains a lot, right?
Okay. So we haven't been scrimming FlyQuest because they just don't find it very useful to scrim us. Usually we crush them. So we haven't been scrimming them before. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's actually hard for me to have a good opinion on it without scrimming them, because I like don't pay close attention to like FlyQuest games. I'm not like, ooh, a FlyQuest game, gotta like analyze that one.
Fair enough.
But I don't know. As a team, they're pretty like they don't have a lot of variety in how they play the game.
Yeah.
Like IGNAR likes to leave bot lane. He likes to roam. He likes to try to set up plays across the map. Solo is like a rock in the top lane. He's like the LCS rock in the top lane. He'll just pick like something. He'll be strong in lane phase. he's not really like a someday that you're going to put everything into, but at the same time you can put resources into him and he'll do pretty well. And then in the mid lane, like PoE is going to be playing Syndra or Azir, and he's going to be a strong team fighter. And that's just like how that team plays. And they're okay, you know?
So that's what I was thinking about FlyQuest actually this week, is that they're so easy to prep for. Like when it comes to the draft, you know exactly what they're doing. And another interesting thing about IGNAR, he doesn't play enchanters. He just does not play any of the
believe
enchanters.
people are familiar with that, Crumbz. I think that little secret might have leaked off the memo sheet to the rest of the world, believe it or not.
Well, I mean, like, none at all. In fact, all the enchanters that you'd think, oh, he's playing them, he's just playing Pantheon. Like, it's right. It's
That's
like,
his version of an enchanter. Yes,
right. It's like, oh yeah, I got my poke, and I can assist the team fight. So it's like, okay, you know, bot lane, he's going to pick some sort of engage, and then mid, there's no globals, there's no Gallia, there's no TF. It's just Ori, Azir. Okay, I know what I'm getting here. You know the jungle's not carrying. You know they're not going to play around bot, so they're just going to like pace things out and hope that Ignorance and Thorin find to play together. And just going into a draft knowing that there's no surprises gives you so much confidence to know that you're going to have an advantage in the game.
Put it this way, Licorice. Here's the comp that they played when they played against TSM. Obviously, like last week, right? Mm-hmm. You were talking before about like it's the good champions, but don't even fit together. So they played a game where they had Renekton, Volibear, Syndra, Ashe, and Pantheon. That was a real 5-man comp. Like they took this, and by the way, they won the game. They actually won this game against TSM. So like, that's an interesting draft. Certainly, nice solo queue draft, maybe. I'm not sure what that comp is supposed to be.
I mean, they just push. They try to win lane. They try to win. Like it's just not very consistent. And I think they struggle a lot against teams that can win games through their bot lane because IGNAR doesn't like to lane bot lane. So like against us, they have like historically always struggled because we're like Sven and Vulcan are really good at just like if we put resources into them and they get ahead, like they just win the whole game.
So is there a team or a player? Like I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but is Someday the only player that you can feel like, oh, there's something to learn from this top laner in LCS?
I mean, I don't like to really like. I don't think about it that way that much because I don't think like focusing that much on my opponents is actually helpful or like good for me. Like I think a lot of it is just focusing on myself and figuring out like where I can get better. At the same time, I think Thorin is going to hate this. My issue with Someday is that I feel like his laning isn't as strong as it should be for a carry top player. Where, like, while he was winning the Camille matchup, I think historically, when I play against Someday, I'm, like, almost always up CS. I'm, like, always winning lane. And I think that when he has winning matchups, he needs more resources than he should to get going. With that said, he is very, very good at playing with a lead and carrying a whole game alone. So, like, the thing that's like something. Oh, should I wait for Crumbz or?
No, it's all right.
Okay,
I'm sure he's fine.
Yeah. So like that has always been like my like holdout whenever people are talking about like some days like the best top laner and he's like so good. Like he should have a stronger laning phase than he does, and that's kind of been my issue with him. And I think a lot of the time, that's like something that like hinders him a lot when he plays against me. Where like in playoffs, he wasn't able to like get the resources because my team was like matching his team or winning, and then like he just like couldn't get to that advantageous position in order to actually win the game. And I think like even in the game that we lost against them, like there was a point in that game, like after I solo killed him, where I was up 2 levels, and if like certain things didn't happen on the map, like he was gonna get like bullied out of lane and like be in a really, really bad spot in that game.
How are you getting this good at laning phase? And is it just the 1v1s? Because you're the only player that I've heard that actually says, oh, screw solo queue. Like I can actually find more value to improve doing other things in the game. Is that the secret to be able to be strong at laning phase, just putting more focus on it versus trying to just play out a whole game with strangers?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to fix laning phase, then solo queue is just not efficient, right? Like you can play solo queue, and I think for me the biggest thing that solo queue helps me practice is like mental and like staying focused on the game and like I think those are the biggest things that I get from
Some mental exercise.
Just
yeah,
endurance.
like I want to stay focused on the
Yeah.
game. I want to like because like that's the best way to practice endurance. Like even if like I'm not even trying to say like Soliko games are shit. I'm just trying to say like that's like you have to stay focused for 40 minutes if you want to win the game consistently. So like that is a really good way to practice that. But if you're trying to practice lane phase, where lane phase only like the most relevant things in lane phase happen in the first like 8 to 10 minutes of the game, like why are you playing a 40-minute Soliko game where 30 minutes of your time is just wasted?
Sure. I think there's a logic to that.
Did you play a lot of the in-houses when they were going, or the in-houses when they were going around?
I don't like in-houses personally. My issues with in-houses are, I mean, one of my issues is that it's like it's like way more helpful to the bad players than the good players, because like the bad players are like getting to like play with the better players and they're like making shot calls that they like wouldn't be thinking
Get
about.
to be comfortable, sure.
And like these other players that aren't practicing their lane phase, like I'll just beat them, and then like they might learn more than I will, and I'll just be like, oh yes, I like executed well, and like it's the same thing. Like it's still a 40-minute game. Like if I want to practice lane phase, I should just be doing 1v1s, or I should be in practice school doing mechanics. Yeah, like I just don't think like as a good player that in-houses are actually like advantageous for you to play in.
That solves it. That solves the in-house mystery. It's not good for good players. So.
The problem is as well, I don't know if people know when they were setting that idea up, it was never going to be like a perfect thing that would work for everyone anyway, because I know, for example, when they do them in other games like Dota, etc., which is where it obviously famously came from, their way of doing it was more like just to not have to play literally just against public players in like a 5v5 where you don't know any of the people. It could be an idiot. It was more just to keep out idiots, as far as I know, or like basically what we do in Counter-Strike. We have a similar thing. We have like the Face It Pro League, which is like top level players play a bunch of pickup games. But again, it's not real practice. Like the joke in Counter-Strike is all you're really doing is practicing shooting the gun, which you can just do it in any scenario. Like if you want to get actual practice of being pro, you have to play with your team. Like it doesn't help you to play versus, but even if there are other pros, because you're also not going to play like teams, are you? Like that's half the problem here. You're just going to play to win the game because you're having fun in the moment, or just general skills is what you're practicing. Whereas like what we're talking about here, more like Licorice, is trying to practice something specifically, like hone in on one area of the game, right? So you're not going to get that from a random guy you playing in-house.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like that's how traditional sports are. Like they don't just like, you don't have the best tennis player in the world. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like, I'm just gonna play a friendly like tennis match against like Nadal for 5 hours. Like that's how I'm gonna get better today. It's like no, you're gonna like practice your serve and you're gonna practice your backhand, or like whatever it is. Like I'm not a tennis expert, but
no, it makes perfect sense what you're saying. Like obviously most sports have like focused training. Basically, you practice one specific thing, not least because you can tell the other person then, this is what we're doing now, do this against me. And then they can specifically be like a tackling person in American football, or they can serve the ball to you and you try return it if it's tennis, etc. The problem with that is like it just hasn't been very well implemented in League at the moment. I mean, to be fair, one issue that's obviously restricted people is because they banned having sister teams. People try to do it with the academy teams now, but then again, sometimes those players aren't good enough, or they don't want to work with them. Like what is your approach been? Because as we're referencing here, obviously you practice against the other Cloud9 top laner, right? So is this just something you just came up with on your own? Were the coaching staff involved with this?
Well, I've actually been doing 1v1s for a really long time. I started when I was in Challenger, and Flame, who was on IMT in the LCS at the time, actually like reached out because we scrimmed them a couple of times, and he was like, oh, like you're actually good at laning. So then we were 1v1 practice partners for...
That's a way bigger thing if people don't know in Korea. Like Korean players will themselves go and get a player, and like sometimes from the sister team back in the day, and you just play a billion 1v1s against each other basically.
Yeah, so we were practice partners for a year, and I attribute a lot of my initial success in LCS to actually doing those, because I was able to like actually pressure lanes. Like when I first started, he would push every side of every matchup, and I was like, what? Like I like didn't understand like what I was doing wrong, and it like helped me get like so much better, and I think it was also helpful for him. So like since then, I've like when I joined LCS, he was still in LCS. We like still practiced against each other, and then he ended up leaving, and that was really sad for me actually, to lose my practice partner. So like for me, like I'll use my academy top laner if I can, like if I think they're good enough, and I think Fudge is really good. So I'm like happy to just practice with him because like he's good, and it's like the safest. Like I'm not leaking strats, I'm not helping my opponents
Yes.
get better, so that's a huge plus. But if like let's say he was really bad, right? Like my academy top laner is bad, I'm not going to get anything out of it. I just ask an LCS top laner to do it because I just think it's like too valuable to not do it.
This is music to Thorin's ear. He now looks at
loving
you
it,
and
yeah.
he just sees flame when
you go.
he sees you from now on. He's like, there
Warming
he
up a
is.
little bit. There you
The
go.
flame is still here.
No, I think that's quite a cool approach. So, like I say, that is actually something Koreans did for many years, but Westerners just never picked up on. It's one of the things I've already talked about this actually on a past episode where I think it was maybe if we did the crackdown. I think it was that or Summoning Insight where we had Licorice on basically, and he was discussing back then that he didn't think playing a billion solo queue games is the right practice approach generally. And actually, I know I tied it to the point of like, because I always bring this up and everyone just ignores me because people just do this even if it's the best Asian players. In the same way as all those fucking mid laners and junglers just pretend that Koreans aren't just spamming the F keys all the time and just looking at the whole map and getting like way better map awareness than like Meteos, who's like slowly moving the screen like me playing fucking Age of Empires about 15 years ago. Like, people just pretend that's not a thing. Like, oh, that's just no big deal. It's like these tiny areas, I think they add up if you really know what you're doing. So similarly, I actually do think the premise of not just practicing like general solo queue and instead practicing something specific, like in the case of the Shy, he plays Earth a billion games and he just learns all the mechanical limits of all the champions he's going to play. And listen, I mean, admittedly, when you're as good as him, you could just say you did anything and pretend that was your method. But he is pretty fucking mechanically good at the game. Like, listen, if it's a fake commercial, Crumbz, if he's like the guy who already was in shape and then said he used the Bowflex 9000, he sold me on it. Like, he tricked me. So he got me on that one, the Shy. If it's not real, then well done. But I think there's a logic to it. What I like basically is people who try different training methods.
You get more time in the first place, right? Like, even if you were to think somehow the solo queue is more effective, think of the downtime in
exactly.
in champ select, like all the posts, like
dude. Even I always think the craziest thing to me is that people have to be pros and then get auto-filled to another role. That's just a complete write-off. Like if I'm the top laner, that support game's a complete waste of my time. Like yeah, you could try and reframe it as like, well, I need to know what the role would look like from a support position. But like that's some like fucking egghead shit. Like that's probably never going to really help you in the game, is it? Like all you got then is just a wasted game that you're like, shit, I thought I was playing this matchup, but I'm not. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I hate autofill games. I feel like they're just so useless. Like I'm just playing it for the LP, basically. Like I'm just trying to pick.
Yes.
When I get autofilled support, because that's the most common, I pick Blitzcrank, try to run around, kill as many people as possible, and hopefully win the game. It's just like, yeah,
that's a waste of time, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So I don't know. Like I don't want to say solo queue is like useless, right? Like that has never been like what I'm trying to say, and I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, Licorice says solo queue sucks. It's the worst. But like solo queue is useful for practicing certain things, but if you're trying to like get better at lane phase or get better at matchups or like, I mean, also VODs are super useful for doing all of that. Like you should be watching, I think every pro should be watching more VODs than they are. But
are you putting in a lot of time like individually in that regard, like, aside from the team? You know,
your own VODs, like whose VODs, like how does that go?
Yeah.
So for me personally, I kind of switched back and forth between like a lot of pro VODs and a lot of solo queue VODs, and I find that generally watching solo queue VODs are actually just more useful for me, because like when you're watching like a match, they don't focus on your lane that often.
Sure.
And like it's really hard to see what they're doing. I think that for jungle, it's probably actually the opposite, where like pro matches are like super important to watch because like the jungle pathing there is going to be like the most important to look at. But for me, like I find that watching just like solo queue VODs of like really good top laners like the Shy and Naguri is like the most useful VODs for me to like look at.
Makes sense.
Huh. So you're just looking at specific player VODs, or what about the like? Because I've seen sometimes where like for example, I'll go and check out like a mid beats video on here's a new laner that's popping off, like getting away with this kind of champion in the laning phase, like this new Zed strat is just like taking off. Like how useful is that? Because it is in the highest echelons of say Korean solo queue,
sure.
But is it something that you want to look at part in specific, or you're just looking at pro players or none of these, like, oh, I don't know who this guy is, but he had a good laning phase?
Yeah, it's not something that I have looked at, but like it sounds useful. I think it might actually be something I check out in the future. Now that you mentioned it, it's just not something I thought about because, like, I don't know, like if people are playing out new picks and they're working, then like sure, like give it a go and see what happens. Because I think, like playing new champions is a really easy way to get wins because like they can't prepare for you because you're pulling out something they haven't seen before. So you get to dictate like the whole lane phase, and they're just like, oh, like I guess this is how it goes, you know? So like I think that's a huge advantage. I think that's something that could be really useful. And I just think like, I mean, my issue is just that like if you look at sports, right? And you look at how people are constantly like getting better in sports. Like The Last Dance just came out and Michael Jordan was like absolute beast at the time. But like if you compared him to the players today, like he's not actually that much better. Like he wouldn't be the best today. He wouldn't be like the most athletic or the best at shooting or like anything like that because people's like practice methods have gotten better over time. And their practice methods aren't like, let's go play a pickup game of basketball and like, like, you know what I mean? It's like a lot of film. It's like a lot of review, a lot of like drills. So I think it's like pretty dumb to think that like League or like other skills are going to work like any differently in that like I just try to like, why reinvent the wheel? Just do what they do, you know?
The thing is, though, that's an area where I think League as an esport has been way behind because it shows actually how a lot of people who play League of Legends just played it for the fun side of the fact it's like a fun game to play. Because what's funny to me is I think of like even past esports, like Crumbz might know this, in games like StarCraft 2, when that was like the biggest esport, it was literally default that the second you end your match in StarCraft 2, you rewatch the VOD on like 4 times speed that you just played right now and you check through your own game and review the VOD basically. Like, did I make a key mistake here? Like, what am I going to do next game? Like, how did he expand his base out? You know, like you try and find some tendencies and whatnot, you know. So I always found it amazing how many League of Legends pros, especially until like the last couple of years, didn't put any extra time in aside from when the coach did it to watch any VODs, to watch any of their opponents, to study for people. Like one of the things I thought is very positive is how many pro players in the last year or so, when it was available, told me they were watching like a bunch of pro views in the different regions. Like loads of the AD carry players were watching when Perk swapped that role to see what he was doing differently. Obviously, if it's available, you try and watch people like the Shy, etc., just because you think, how the fuck are they doing this stuff? Like, who wouldn't want to see how they're getting away with this shit? Like, just magical, isn't it? So I think that's quite cool, though, that people, like the people who basically have an appetite for that, have like tools to go to now.
Yeah, I mean, not having Pro View for LCK and LPL is like really sucked.
Yeah,
recently because that like went away. But I mean, it just means you have to put more effort in to like find their solo queue games and find out when they're playing like the matchups that you care about and like watch those instead because like it's almost the same as watching Pro View when you like are just like in control with the spectator client.
I think it's hard to justify that you're giving it your best effort to improve without actually involving some sort of review. And it's not even entirely to do with League, like with pretty much anything. Like if you're whether you're reviewing casting or whatever it is, you writing any VOD, any videos you made, just sitting down and looking at it and say, okay, I'm gonna enjoy it for like what's come out. Let's just have a critical eye on it. Do you feel that same way where if you don't end up reviewing a game, you're like, I don't think I'm getting as much as I could from this game? Or are you okay, just, all right, I saw it, I in my mind already knew what the major mistakes were, I don't need to go back and check it out?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I kind of have a rule where I will play a game and I should be able to pull at least one thing from it. And if I can pull one thing from it, then that's great, I'm improving and I can like move on. Or I can like pull a lot of things from it if it's like one of those games that like you can learn a lot from. But that's kind of like my general rule. When I play like a solo queue game or a game on stage, I'll try to pull like at least one thing out of it that I can like work on or improve for next time, and then I'm happy.
Do you find yourself hitting the same thing again? Like oh, needed to pull this one. Like here we go, pulling the same. I don't know, level 2 play that I needed to work on. Like how often, if something keeps recurring, what is your plan to make sure that that doesn't continue?
I mean, it's just to make it a bigger priority. Like, like, I mean, it really depends what it is. Like, if it's something in lane phase, it's easily fixable with like 1v1s or something like that. If it's like a map position that you keep finding yourself in, then you just have to like find a day where like that is what you're focusing on. Because like if it keeps coming up, then obviously it's just gonna take more of your focus to get there than like you have in a normal scenario. So it's just gonna take more effort.
This video was kindly supported by Jack Hanna, Dean Tanglis, Soliko, Bobby, Spencer Green, Istar, WhattaThings, Xinged, Alexander Rao, Tobias Bernasconi, JDubs, the Puyallup Tribe, Jensen Goh, and of course, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to ask a question in one of those monthly video AMAs I do. Do you want teasers? See who the upcoming guests are for my work? Maybe you want to be part of one of those donator discussions with me each month. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today by the description box link to Patreon below.